This is a Let's Talk Church Safety and Security microsode with your host, Paul Buckner. Hey, sheepdogs, I wanted to talk about realism in training. So, something to think about. Let's say that you're doing an airsoft active shooter drill, or you got your finger glocks out, or whatever you're doing. As you are moving through an active shooter training, having someone who is calling you by name, because in a church safety scenario, in the less than a percent chance that you're going to see an active shooter at your church, but we train for it, right? Having someone calling your name, they're holding themselves together, they're laying up against the wall. There doesn't have to be real blood, or it doesn't have to be stage blood. It doesn't have to look that real. But they're there, and they're going, Paul, buddy, come here, man. I'm not gonna make it. Don't walk away, man. What are you doing? Come on. And you've still got to go deal with the threat. That's one of those things that is something to really, really think about, is adding that realism to it, where you've got somebody who's freaking out and calling your name, or they're sitting there rocking and crying over the body of a dead loved one. That is something to think about when it comes to, some people get so hysterical that they can't function. And so it's sometimes difficult in law enforcement when you get to the scene of something traumatic to make heads or tails of it, because it's a train wreck and you're getting there and you're trying to piece it together. You're trying to figure out what's going on. And some people are so hysterical that they just about can't function, and or can't function at all. And so you stage an environment where it's in your auditorium, it's in your fellowship hall, your cafetorium, whatever you have, and you have somebody in there who's just screaming and and they can't function. And in that moment, because in real life you'll encounter people who are like that, and they can't tell you where the threat is, and so the threat may have run off. That's something to definitely think about. And putting unknowns into a situation like that, where you've got people that are portraying those different roles, or maybe you've got somebody who is really angry. And I think this is an extremely realistic situation, where maybe there's been violence and you've cornered the threat and you've got the threat at bay. You've heard me talk about this before, and someone runs up to get some street justice, and they're like, you hurt my dad, you hurt my son, whatever, this loved one of mine. And you may have to be like, whoa, hang on, Hank, stop. Something to really think about when it comes to that. So adding that realism to the training, and maybe it's kind of like something that I saw a law enforcement officer do years ago. Was there were guys that were showing up to the training, and this is with like airsoft, and a lot of airsoft guns will hold hundreds of pellets. And what he would do was he'd say, how many rounds are in your magazine? And 6. You have 6 shots. Well, how's that fair? In a real life scenario, you have exactly 6 shots in that magazine before you have to reload. And so he would set them up where they could have a reload or whatever. And you would see people coming out of that training going, I don't want to go into a real gunfight with 6 rounds and then a mag change. Interesting. Realism in our training. And so, I've worked with airsoft rifles that there's 100 pellets maybe in what would be a 30-round magazine in a real weapon. Let's add some realism to what we're doing. I think that can be incredibly valuable. And maybe coming up to a situation where somebody's barricaded something or whatever. So it's interesting to think about and to come up with scenarios. We did one years ago that was kind of fun, which was we took a cardboard cutout of a human being about 6 feet tall, and it was years and years ago, and we had airsoft guns, and we had my son, who was wearing a face mask, take this cardboard cutout hostage, and he's trying to keep himself from getting shot. And I'll tell you, in real life, when someone is trying to keep themselves from being shot, they can get very creative, and airsoft hurts. And so we added that level of realism, where we ended up in a situation where it was now. We didn't have a choice. We had to deal with the threat now. We couldn't step back. And so what I ended up doing was I'm weapon out, and I had a Marine that was on my team, retired Marine, flank him and take him. And then in another instance, as my Marine was flanking him, it was pretty funny. My son didn't appreciate it a whole lot, but he did think it was funny, but it hurt. So I shot him in the ankle with an airsoft pellet. He's like, ah, and he jerked and made his head a target. I'm being funny, but adding levels of realism in there, to where the person has to run up and there's a fire in the kitchen, and so they don't even know. Like, a lot of us think active shooter when we train, understandably, but what if you don't tell your folks what's going on, and you're like, there's a fire in the kitchen, there's a fire in the nursery, fire extinguishers now, because it's probably going to take more than one. And so then you have to find the fire extinguishers that are viable. And so where are they? How fast can you get to them? And a lot of times you'll start looking at things differently, going, I actually need to have a fire extinguisher closer to this area. Code says this, but code is the minimum level that we have to abide by. Let's get up to a more maximum level. Let's get up to something that we might need. And it's a hard sell. I worked with a church that was a really hard sell for them when I said we need a fire extinguisher on either side of the fellowship hall, and we need one in the kitchen. And the one in the kitchen, if you have the potential for a grease fire, you absolutely need at that point to have one designed to put out grease fires. And training with that level of realism, we did one. It was a lot of fun. We cross-trained with law enforcement, and my son again was there for that one, and he barricaded a door in such a fashion that it had an alarm system. Basically, what he did was he took a chair and he put it at a really sharp angle to it, where we couldn't actually lock this door. Nobody had a key to it anywhere in the church, and it was an interior door, but it connected two parts of the building. And what ended up happening was he put this up against it, and there was no way to get through that door without sounding this alarm. The chair would fall. It was pretty clever. And one of my officer buddies, it's my brother, he's really good, a really, really good friend of mine. He was laughing. He's like, that's smart. And so we were having to cross train for that, to the point that as we're going up through there and we're going to take out the threat, we had to storm quickly. We had to breach and go in quickly because we knew he was going to know. And coming through that door, there was a classroom in front of us that went to the left. There was a stairway slightly to the right that went downstairs. And then opposite, there was another classroom. And I explained to him, what we're going to have to do is take the first classroom, swing around, and somebody's gonna have to hold while somebody takes the classroom, explained it to him, and we're gonna have to hold the stairs and take the second classroom and then go down the stairs. And by the time the second classroom was being taken, we were receiving incoming rounds coming up the steps, but we were able to flank him with other officers to get in. And it's just, sometimes that level of realism is, it makes you think differently about things. I can tell you that it caused me to not allow certain things to be placed in certain places. If I could control it, some things you can't, obviously, but if I could control it, there weren't going to be these things that could be thrown through the window or different things like that. I wasn't going to arm a potential attacker by leaving something that they could turn into a weapon easily outside the church to break in, or to arm themselves to hurt people. And so there's things that I could impact that way. That is something that add to a level of realism. So going back a couple steps, having people screaming and crying, having people that are inconsolable, having people that are angry, and then something that happened to James McGarvey, a buddy of mine from way back, something that he talked about that I've never forgotten, is a lady that ran up during a medical event, and I think her husband was having a heart attack, and I believe he was unresponsive, but she ran up and she was shaking him while he was trying to save her husband's life, and she was, screeching, yelling, do something. And I think that can add to a level of realism when you're dealing with a medical event, because sometimes parents can mean well, or loved ones can mean well, but they're actually doing something that's harmful. A lot of times when we go to medical calls as a police officer, I actually will keep family busy. and I may pray with them, chaplain, right? Or I may, what's your son's date of birth? Well, the paramedics are going to ask all that when they get there, but what if they can get to the hospital faster because I've already got those details? The biggest thing that they want, and you've heard me say this before, is they want to know what the person is allergic to. That's it. More important than their blood pressure, more important than are they diabetic, more important than their age, more important than their name or their social or any of that stuff is, what are they allergic to? And I will tell you, I have talked to people that I thought might pass out, and I have asked, what are you allergic to? Because if you pass out, I'm not going to know. And I actually know a paramedic. I did some training with him that he told me that they gave somebody something in an ambulance, not realizing the guy was allergic to it. It almost killed him. They had to undo that and then find something else. Obviously, they had multiple tools in the tool chest, but they were able to use something else to keep the guy stable. But the first thing they gave him almost killed him because they didn't know what he was allergic to. I think a lot of that can add realism to our training. So, as always, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. Remember Semper Disciplina, that lifestyle of discipline training. God bless. If you enjoyed this microsode, check out the video and audio versions of the Let's Talk Church Safety and Security podcast.